No, it's not 4 o'clock. You are correct. If you're wondering what is going on, I am late. I was in a training. I'm in Toastmasters. Any of you want to increase your speaking abilities, let me know and I'll invite you to our Toastmaster group. We meet online, we're virtual. But I was in training because I have been volunteered. I kind of volunteered, they kind of volunteered me to be treasurer. It's a good leadership opportunity. Anyway, I took this training and I thought it was going to be from 3 to 4, and then I'll jump on. And it went on and on and on. It turns out it was supposed to be from 3 to 5. So at this moment, I'm kind of feeling what our talk today is a little bit about. We're talking about overwhelm. So I'm going to just calm myself. One of the ways that I teach you to do it, I'm just going to take a couple deep breaths, and then I will get ready to get with our show today. You want to take them with me? All right, let's breathe in. And hold it for 4. Then breathe out. Then hold it for 4. I'm going to do it again. In. Hold it for 4. Out. Hold it for 4. Now, really, we should do that 3 or 4 times, but I think that's enough for me to get a little brain reset and welcome you to Sunday Springboard, where we help women become confident and thrive after toxic relationships. When I've done most of my teaching to you about trauma and resilience, I've done most of my learning from the Arizona Trauma Institute. But I actually heard a talk the other day by a Dr. Amy Pijian, I think her name is, and she teaches the same things they do, but she put a little different spin on it, and I decided I wanted to add this to our toolbox. So I want to share with you some of the things that I learned from her. Hang on a minute and let me share my screen. Okay. So some of this, like I said, I've told you, I've learned it before, I've told you about it before, but I think it just has a little bit of a twist. So our premise today is that stress and trauma are 2 different things. We've talked about that before. We've talked about the fact that stress is not what gets you, it's your reaction to the stress. Let's keep on with that idea. So stress itself is not trauma. Stress can be a challenge. It can be a stretch, getting you out of your comfort zone. It can be a high energy state. So think of times that you felt this good kind of stress. Maybe like this woman, you were doing a run. Maybe you were competing in something else. Maybe you were competing in some kind of athletics. Maybe you got a new job. You're feeling a little stressed, but you're excited about it. Maybe you're doing the first time to teach a class at church, or maybe you're speaking for a group of people for the first time. You feel energetic, you feel excited, you feel stressed, but this is not a bad stress. This stress is pulling you, stretching you. Remember, we've also talked about how when we exercise, we wear down our muscles, we break them down a little bit, we stress them out a little bit, and then they grow back stronger. So stress in itself can be good, and it can make us stronger excuse me, if we react in sorry. If we react in a good way. So when it can become traumatic is when it becomes an experience that causes overwhelm. Now remember, we often think of trauma, and people who are not learning about trauma, they think of trauma as the event itself. It's the war, it's the rape, it's the wreck, it's the terrible thing that happened to you. But what the trauma actually is what happens to your body. And what Dr. Amy says is, she says trauma is an experience that causes overwhelm. When what you're going through makes you feel overwhelmed. And I would say this would be when it makes you feel this way on an ongoing basis. it turns into trauma, and it is stored in our bodies. Now, there are two different categories of experiences that can cause it to be trauma. If you have too much too fast. I saw a post the other day about a woman posted, she said that her father-in-law was in the hospital with cancer maybe. Mother was in the hospital with COVID, and dad just suffered a possible stroke last night. Well, she may be feeling a little traumatized right now. She said too much too fast. In the past 2, going on 3 years now, we've had a little too much too fast. We've had people getting sick, people dying. We've had the whole world shut down. We've had to homeschool our kids or work and homeschool our kids. We've had to try to do our jobs from home that we always did in the office. We've had to revamp our homes so that we could have a place to work. We've worked with our animals, with our kids. We've had our loved ones go to the hospital and we weren't able to be with them because of COVID. I know a woman who her dad died and they weren't able to be in the hospital with him because of COVID. We've had so much, and add on, we've had a lot of racism problems. We've had political problems. We've had the war in Ukraine. We've had the shootings at the schools. We've had too much too fast. If you feel a bit overwhelmed, you're with the good crowd. It would be a little bit abnormal for you not to feel overwhelmed unless you already knew how to process this and work through it. The other thing that can cause trauma is if you have too little for too long. So maybe this would be people in other countries. We don't have this in the US so much, but you don't have enough food, you don't have enough water, you don't have enough what am I trying to say? Place to live. You don't have enough of security of that. Or maybe here, maybe you don't have enough attention from your parents. Maybe your parents are there, but they're on their phones. Or maybe you don't have enough food. Maybe you don't have enough support as a child. Many things children have too little, too long. Maybe as an adult, maybe you're in an abusive relationship and it's been too little, too long. They have not loved you. They have not supported you. They have torn you down, verbally abused you, physically abused you. So that would go with both of these, right? Too much, too fast, and too little, too long. When we experience either one or these can cause us to store trauma in our bodies. Now, to explain this one to you, I'm going to use a different metaphor. Actually, the Arizona Trauma Institute talks about this metaphor also, but I've generally used the other one. We've talked about Bruce Banner and the Hulk. When you're regulated, you're Bruce Banner, you're rational, you're logical, and when you get deregulated, you're like the Hulk. We also talked, if y'all remember, we talked about a ladder, and we said that kind of in the middle, at the top, actually, the ladder was where you wanted to be. And then if you got dysregulated, you start off in the fight or flight movement, and then you end up in the freeze. This is another metaphor, and you might like this one better. I found this very interesting when I was researching this week. This is called the window of tolerance. So in this metaphor, the middle is where we want to be. So the window of tolerance, Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Pat Ogden came up with this idea, and they say that the window of tolerance is the optimal zone of arousal. So you're able to thrive in your everyday life. It's like sailing within a river of well-being where we're able to respond to everything that comes to our way with equanimity. We're not being thrown off course. So it's not saying nothing ever happens to us, but that when things do happen, we're able, for the most part, to be able to handle it. Now, what happens when we get too much? We get more and more and more up to the top of our window of tolerance, which is where many of us are right now because of the pandemic and all the things that have gone on. When we get to the top of the window of tolerance and a little thing else comes up, puts us over the window of tolerance and it's too much. We're in what's called hyperarousal. where we get in panic, overwhelm, anger, anxiety, and racing thoughts. Now, if that goes on for too long, we just can't handle it and we just drop down to the bottom. It's too much, can't do it. This is where the freeze. So the top is the fight or flight, and the bottom is the freeze. This is where you're numb, you disassociate, you're sluggish, you get depressed, you're withdrawn. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in this next picture. So this is the way a healthy nervous system is meant to be. We're in the middle, we're in what we call the parasympathetic system. And this is where your body, this makes all your body work correctly. When you get aroused, trigger, you're scared, you're angry, your brain thinks you're in danger, whether it's physical or mental, remember, it doesn't know the difference. You get activated, you get dysregulated, and then something happens, and that puts you into the sympathetic system. The sympathetic system is to get you moving, get you going, get you getting safe. And you get safe, you get it, whatever happens, you get that worked out, and then you settle back down. And you get back down in the parasympathetic. And life is just kind of like a roller coaster. If you've ever heard Steve Martin in that movie, life is a roller coaster. And this is normal. But it's normal and to have these different waves. And if you can bring the waves down and smaller, then that's good. Some people have really highs, ups and downs and ups and downs. And that's okay, but it's not as comfortable, makes you not as happy. And then what can happen is if you are not able to discharge the stress, this traumatic stress, remember, not the good stress, the traumatic stress. So you have the event happen and you are going along here and it zips you up to the top. You're being on. This is that dysregulated state. This is where you're like the Hulk. This is where you're angry, aggressive, you're reactive, impulsive. You could be hostile, you could be irrational, because you're not thinking clearly, you're just reacting. You're generally self-centered in this state, and you might have poor focus. This is where people complain that I can't pay attention, I can't sleep. It might be hyperactive, anxiety, irritability. So many things happening when you're in the on. Now, when you're on too long, and that's fight or flight, remember, you jump down into the frozen, in the off. When you get in the off, this is when you're stuck, you're depressed, you feel paralyzed, you don't have any energy to do anything. You could have some disassociation, you feel emotionally numb. Maybe it feels like what's going on doesn't feel real. I've had that happen when I first went through the pain of losing my children in the divorce, lose them, I lost a relationship with them. And I just kept thinking, this doesn't feel real. This doesn't feel real. I've looked back on some times there and I realized I was doing some disassociating during that time. I didn't know it at the time. I just felt weird. This is where we do self-soothing. This is where your addictions come. When you get down to this frozen spot, you can do the addiction, self-injury, suicide, compulsive behavior is definitely down here also. You're reactive and impulsive, and you're sad and withdrawn at the bottom. So what can happen is you could be stuck in the on and you could be angry all the time, or you could be stuck in the off and you're just frozen, you're depressed, you have no energy, or you could be stuck in the on off. So in the top, you're full of anxiety, you've got this you're attentive, looking for danger, looking for whatever's going to come, and you're always hyper arousal. And then when you're in the stuck, you're just like, give it up, I'm hopeless, it's never going to change. You can get stuck being between the two. Normally, the ideal is you go up and then you kind of even out. But if you get stuck between the two, you just bounce back and forth. You're up here in the anger, in the anxiety, in the fear, and then you're down in the dumps and the depressed. And you just keep going back and forth and back and forth. And when you get in this situation, you're generally going to have to do something to be able to move you out of that. Now, sometimes if you go to therapist, if you go to one that's not trauma informed, I really recommend that if you're in this situation and you do go to a therapist, that you go to a trauma informed therapist. Depending upon how severe your issues are, an trauma informed coach like myself, I'm a certified trauma and resilience coach. Sometimes, and many times, if you just have moderate symptoms, a coach can help you as much or just in a different way than a therapist could. I'm always eager to talk with you to see if we could have a coach relationship. There's a link in the show notes. You can click that and schedule a free coaching session, and we can see what that would work. But anyway, if you don't want to do that and you want a therapist, get a trauma-informed therapist, because sometimes a therapist may want to try to talk you through working out of this trauma. And that will not work until you get to a point that you can get your body calmed. Remember, trauma is held in your body. And when you're in this on or in your off, your brain is not functioning correctly. And you have to find a way to get regulated, to get in the middle, to where you can even work on some of the cognitive behavioral things that a therapist may use, or a non-informed trauma-informed therapist might try to do immediately. A trauma-informed therapist is going to get you regulated, and then they'll work on those things. So there are 3 steps that we want to use to release trauma from your body. The first one is you have to have a felt sense of safety. What is causing you to stay in this trauma is a feeling of not being safe. And until you can learn how to make yourself feel safe, you won't be able to move out of the trauma. The next one is, once you feel safe, you utilize a support system. It could be a coach, a therapist, it could be a support group, it could be family and friends, but people to support you in whatever way you specifically need. It's best to have at least one person who can be detached, who can ask you some confrontive questions that can make you think deeply. It's also good to have other friends and family who just support you unconditionally. Whatever you say is right and good, and where do we bury the bodies? That's always good too. But you need to have some support. And then once you get the safety and the support, then you are to a point where you're able to build a capacity for growth and joy. This is where you're going to do all the cognitive thinking, the growing, the expanding. But you got to get number 1 and number 2 handle on those before you can move into 3. So next week, we're going to talk about some tips to how to do the safety and the support, and then we'll move into 3 a little bit, but mostly next week we'll talk about safety. So that's it for today. I think it's interesting. I like the idea that trauma is what overwhelms you. Just because it's stress doesn't mean it's trauma. It becomes trauma when it overwhelms you for a period of time, and you could end up going back and forth between on and off, and you can't get out of them. Have you experienced this, or have you been in either one of these states? Do you feel like right now you're on, or do you feel like you're off, or you don't even know what's going on? I would just love to talk to you, help you get some clarity on what's going on in your life. Like I said, use that link, schedule a session, and you all, I hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.